In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to printing. That means that we need to review line weights, scale, which will become very important now, because you'll remember up till now we've been working in 1-to-1 scale. Just because we can see hundreds of feet on our screen doesn't mean that the computer is actually performing any scale internally. It isn't. We're zooming in or out to accommodate us visually. Now when we go to print the document, scale will become important. But let's start with line weights again. And we need to go to where the line weights are set, and they are controlled by you. And you can find them under drawing aids, and I believe this will be the case even for the Carlson running on AutoCAD. Now the dialog boxes that appear will probably look very different, but you need to find, perhaps by trial and error, where to get to the line weights. And this will look familiar even if you're running on AutoCAD. You'll notice that the line weights right now are currently set to 0.13 millimeters. Now granted, we don't think in metric units all that often, but it isn't really important. If you prefer, you can default to inches. I personally leave it set to millimeters because that's the way it's initially set up, and you will learn through trial and error and your own personal preferences what default line weights you'd like to have in your document. And I will caution you that this would be subject to the printer itself. If you're using 2 or 3 different kinds of plotters within your organization, these values may change accordingly. But I do find that line weights between 13 and 18 to be visually appropriate for most of the geometry created for 1 inch equals 20. You will have to experiment, but this default line weight is going to be very important to you when you go to print. You'll also notice that the current line weight is being selected by layer, and that means we have to go, let's close this out, and let's go back to our layers dialog, and you'll notice that line weight can be controlled by individual layer within this dialog, but by default these line weights are set to the default. If you prefer to edit them individually, you're free to do that here. You just select the appropriate layer, and you can see now I've overridden the default of 0.13 millimeters, and I've now set it to 0.2 millimeters, which is a thicker line weight. Again, this is probably going to be controlled by internal office standards or your own personal preferences. Normally, the default values work just fine for worksheet type printing. Not being too concerned about line weight. But when you go to create the finished product, you will be concerned with this. And again, you're going to fall back on internal office standards, or through trial and error you're going to set up your own standard. So line weight, a default value has been set up, and you can alter it within the layers dialog. That's what's important. You can also choose in the layers dialog whether to print a layer or not. You'll notice this layer, def points, by default Carlson, it creates that layer, but it doesn't print it. You can do the same to other layers. Depending on the purpose for this printed document, you may choose to not want to show certain things. You can also turn your layers on and off, but if you say not to print it, it will still be visible on the screen if you leave it on, but it will not print when you go to print the document. So that can be a very useful feature. So there's a lot of flexibility with line weight and what gets printed and how it gets printed. Color, again, colors shown in the screen are controlled by the layer dialog. Colors can be reassigned in the plotting dialog. We're not going to talk about that. That's kind of an advanced subject. So there's a great deal of flexibility in how you print, and that's the point. Let's close this out. One other thing that we need to talk about, you'll notice that our index contours, the ones that we created in an earlier lab, have a thickness associated with them that is displayed on the screen. Let's go back to the surface, triangulate, and contour dialog so that you can see where that was done. Draw Index Contours is checked. And we set the contour, the index interval, to 10 feet. And then we set a line width, 0.3 millimeters. So that's where that came from. And it is displayed on the screen. And it will print at that line weight as well.